Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to tackle an issue which keeps coming up, namely people misrepresenting trade or investment data in trying to show that Brexit hasn't harmed our economy. This is despite the fact that the people trying to claim this without any background in data analysis are contradicting several different groups of economists and even the government which brought us our hard Brexit in the first place. So I'd like to explain exactly where they are going wrong for the benefit of those who come across it, as you will, repeatedly. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I've been trying to get this video out for weeks now. 2 weeks. Oh, I'll bring it out then. Oh no, news has happened. Oh, more news has happened. I'm doing it today. The rest of the news, that can start again tomorrow. Actually, I'll discuss more of that in the stream this evening. But for now, because in all of this 2 weeks when I've been wanting to do this video, I keep seeing the comments, oh look, the trade data shows that we've actually increased our exports to the EU. No, we haven't. They've gone down. And I know I'll complain of, when there's not so much political news, or it gets less crazy. But there must be a happy medium. Can there not be just enough? Just enough. But anyway, never mind. Brexit claim debunking time. Some Brexiteers, and I stress some, because most know this argument goes nowhere, are trying to claim that our exports to the EU have actually gone up since we imposed massive trade barriers between ourselves and the EU. So I'm going to do two things. First of all, I'm going to show how the data disproves this. They all say, oh, we get our data from the ONS. No, you don't. And second, I'm going to point out just how stupid the whole concept is when you consider a few basic facts. And the thing is, we know that some people in politics, whether politicians themselves or just commentators, will just lie. They're lying. They know the truth. They choose to mislead. However, and some do it maliciously because they gain something. Some just do it because they think it's for some greater good and they fool themselves it's worth lying. But there are plenty of others who actually believe what they're saying. They just don't have the expertise to understand what might be basic to me or to many of us. I come from a mathematical background. Data analysis skills are above average. But when you look at the situation, very few, if you look at a lot of political commentators bouncing around in the UK, very few of them come from any sort of STEM type background. They're much more likely to come from a humanities background. History or literature seem to be very common. So what I'm saying is that not all of the Brexit commentators are necessarily lying. They just don't understand. So you can see how someone like this sees a statement and they look at some data and they look, oh, the exports or the investment figures, whatever they're looking at, I'm seeing reports that the exports are down. And then they check it out, as you do. They think they go to the ONS, Office for National Statistics. They look at the figures and go, but the numbers are higher now. Why are people saying the figures are down? And then they make what is to them the logical conclusion that, well, those making these claims must be liars then. After all, you would, wouldn't you? The ONS publish accurate data, and if it doesn't seem to show what others are claiming, and those others are qualified enough to read it, then of course you conclude that they are misleading. And if you see lots of different groups making the claim, you inevitably conclude there must be some sort of conspiracy. Of course you do. But the thing about ONS data, and they make this very clear, if you actually go to the Office for National Statistics and you look up any recent report on trade data, it's there, it's on all of them. It's that they say the data's seasonally adjusted, but it is not adjusted for inflation. And this is crucial to understand whether exports are up or down in real terms, which are the only terms that matter. That's why they're called real. Let's look at an example. So in 2005, year before the referendum, UK exports to the EU were valued at £223 billion. That's in the value of a pound in 2015. In 2019, the last year before we left the EU, it was worth £267 billion, again in 2019 money. And in 2021, it was valued at £267 billion. So the latest data we have, it takes a long time to collate a whole year's worth of trade data, but I will do a similar exercise when we get 2022 properly. It's going to be a beauty. I will say you may think you see some 2022 data floating around. And it's true, there is monthly data, and you think, well, why don't you just add up the month? Well, if you do that, you end up at £195 billion, which would represent an absolutely massive drop in exports. So, but rather than make a meal of what is probably incomplete data for now, I will just leave it. When the ONS publish what is their definitive full year value, which will be sometime, I'll do it again. And I'll do it every year until we're back in the EU. But let's look at these 3 years for which we have accurate data right now. So someone looking at them, and this is what you'll get if you just look up the values for these 3 years on the Office for National Statistics, where it has a message saying these aren't adjusted for inflation. If you just look at the raw figures, you look at them and you go, okay, our exports were higher in 2019 than 2015, okay, but the same in 2021 as 2019. So, okay, exports didn't grow in 2021, but at least they didn't go down. And we were out of the single market then, they didn't go down, so that's all right. Only they did, because a pound worth of trade in 2021 was not worth the same as in 2019 or 2015. If you think about a basket of groceries, what it cost you in 2015, the exact same basket of groceries cost you much more in 2019, but its intrinsic value is the same. This is because the absolute value of the pound goes down every single year as inflation increases. Adjusting all figures to 2021 levels, so we're using a common value of the pound, the data would now look like this. 2015 exports to the EU would be worth in 2021 money £249 billion. In 2019 it would be £276 billion, and in 2021 it would be that £267 billion, because we're using the 2021 value of the pound. So we can see that our exports to the EU dropped £9 billion. That's just exports to the EU, not taking account of other values which make up the overall size of our economy. So exports to the EU are down. And this measure is what you would use if you wanted to compare the real value of any form of trade between 1 year and another. It's a measure of like the volume of trade, if you like, whether that trade be a crate of Mars bars, machine parts or whatever. So our exports to the EU, undeniably down for 2021, the year we exited the single market and customs union. And for you know, anyone wanting to wait with bated breath thinking, oh yeah, but Phil, that was just the first year, a few teething problems, not a problem, a few little wobbles. And then we powered through in 2022. Like I say, if I use the data we now have for 2022, in 2022 money, it's £195 billion. That is a massive drop, and that's without me even taking inflation into account. And the inflation was huge last year. So I'm not going to do that because that would be dishonest. So the idea that our exports have increased is clearly wrong. The data shows this once you take inflation into account. In fact, if you want to use the raw figures we have for 2022 at the moment, you don't even need to take inflation into account. But then there's also the empirical thinking, because then you have to say, so, okay, so we've now shown that actually exports are down. How was a Brexit ever going to increase our exports to the EU? Because even Brexiteers, the ones on the telly, even they never tried to claim that. The likes of Rees-Mogg, Farage and co. None of them tried to claim that. In the early days, they claimed that our trade with the EU would stay the same. Obviously, they were never going to convince people that our trade with the EU would increase by leaving the EU. Who would be stupid enough to believe that? Their pitch was that we would maintain our trade with the EU, but then get better trade with other countries, so the net effect is positive. Later on, when it became clear that our trade with the EU would of course suffer, I mean, for goodness sake, they still claimed that the trade with the other countries would compensate. But none of them tried to say that we would sell more to the EU. How would that work? So, as a result of leaving the single market and customs union, there are some things, well, this is the single market, there are some things we are no longer allowed to even export to the EU. They're just banned. So that is a loss of exports, clearly. What we can export now, and this is customs union and single market, requires time-consuming and expensive documentation. So that is, of course, going to reduce exports because those goods are now more expensive for our EU customers, so they may find cheaper stuff elsewhere in the single market. And then when the documentation is produced and it's still somehow competitive, there are delays due to checks at the border. So that hits exports further because some customers will go, okay, well, we're still okay with the price, but it's now taking too long for you to get the stuff to us. We're just going to get it from Spain. You know, so the theory that we could ever increase increase exports to the EU when we raised trade barriers was just bonkers. And the data, of course, reflects the insanity of even thinking it. They'd be on shaky enough ground if they were still trying to claim that the post-Brexit trade deals were at least compensating for the loss of EU trade, as the Brexiteers used to. But even that's gone wrong. So if you look at that, the vast majority of the trade deals we have with other countries now outside the EU are exactly the same ones we had when we're in the EU. The EU have a trade deal with Japan that is better than ours. In fact, ours is so bad that our exports to Japan have gone down since it came into being. Down. The Australia trade deal, that's not yet in force. You can't claim anything on that. But it will, the government's own estimation is that it won't actually add anything to our GDP. And what it will absolutely do is crush our farming industry once it's in place. The EU are also working on a better deal with the Aussies for themselves. You know, the New Zealand deal, EU have just announced a New Zealand trade deal that is better than the one we got. Ours was so bad that when it was announced, the New Zealand news media were ridiculing us. They couldn't believe it. So our rest of world trade is looking decidedly ropey as well. But the very idea that exports specifically to the EU could ever go up. So you can argue to people, oh yeah, but if we get like, you know, more bespoke trade deals with other countries, our trade with those might go up because we don't have to consider the concerns of like Belgium or Ireland or France or anything like that. It's just, you know, between us and them. That has a certain logic to it. But the idea that exports to the EU could ever go up when you raise trade barriers, I just don't know what to tell you if you can ever believe that, other than, would you like to buy Buckingham Palace from me? But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships, and until next time, I'll see you later.